The Quran, Torpedo 4, Textual Criticism. The unchanging Quran that has changed, and many times at that. Let's begin with some basics. How does Arabic work? The Sin, or Standard Islamic Narrative, claims that the Quran was revealed by Gabriel to Muhammad in 7 dialects that they call ahruf or qira'at. Is this true? To answer this, we need to examine how Arabic works. The Arabic script consists of a skeleton of strokes and shapes that make the consonants, called the rasm. The vowels are other symbols added above or below each consonant. The problem is that only 6 out of the 22 consonants are unique in appearance. All other 16 come from adding special dots to these 6. For example, the kha, the ha, and the jim are all the same shape, but the dots make the difference. And below we can see that just using 3 of the same bowl-shaped letters, we can get 19 different words depending on where you put the dots. The dots really do make the difference. More basics. Where does Quranic Arabic come from? In the ancient world, there were 3 Arabias. There was Arabia Petraea, which was Jordan, Arabia Felix, which was Yemen, and Arabia Deserta, which was the rest. Arabic is a Semitic language, and the table to the right compares different Semitic languages. We can see that the South Arabian script does not need dots to differentiate letters, but as we saw, for Quranic Arabic, the dots make the difference, and without them, you cannot read the manuscript. Quranic Arabic is much more like Syriac. This was the language spoken in Arabia Petraea, that is, north again. This leads to 2 basic problems. Problem number 1. The Quran is written in the wrong Arabic. The South Arabic or Sabaic script had been used by the people of Arabia Deserta and Arabia Felix for 1200 years. This would include Mecca and Medina. If the Quran actually was written in Mecca and Medina, it would have been written in Sabaic Arabic. But the Quran is written in a script used by the people of Arabia Petraea, that is Jordan and Syria. These areas were hundreds of kilometers north of Mecca. North again. So the bottom line is the Quran is written in the wrong kind of Arabic to have been compiled in Mecca and Medina. Problem 2. The dots make the difference. Not only were manuscripts written in the wrong Arabic for Mecca, the first manuscripts have no dots or vowels. This means that we cannot read them exactly. Only in the 8th century were dots and vowels added, but the problem was that there was no standard form for them, so different people put their dots in different places. This led to different versions. What was the outcome of these problems? Over the next 200 years, dozens of competing versions with hundreds of readings with thousands of differences between these readings. And by the 10th century, different places recited the Quran differently, which caused theological and political problems. How men solved the problems with Allah's eternal word. In AD 936, Ibn Mujahid, a man, selected 7 readings. You would expect that he would have chosen based on theology or textual criticism. Instead, he chose based on politics and popularity. This explains why 3 out of the 7 were from Kufa alone. Only 1 was from Mecca or Medina. Basically, readers who had more students and were recited by more people were preferred over others, regardless of whether they actually went back to Muhammad. And note, none of these 7 readers lived at the time of Muhammad or could have known him personally. The earliest is AD 737, that is 100 years after Muhammad's death. In 1194, Al-Shatibi, another man, chose 2 transmitters or rawis for each of the 7 readers, giving another 14 Qurans, making 14 plus 7 equals 21 Qurans altogether. In 1429, Al-Jazari, another man, selected 3 further readers, each with 2 transmitters, that is 9, making a total of 7 plus 14 plus 9, that is 30 different Arabic Qurans. Note, these were all chosen by men, not by Allah. And in 1924, Cairo selects the Hafs Quran as their standard. This was done for political reasons, not because of any textual criticism. In 1935, it was made official for Egypt, and in 1985, the Saudi government makes it their official Quran. But the others are still available today, and there are thousands of differences between them. This is a diagram of the many Arabic Qurans of the Standard Islamic Narrative. First, we have the Quran of Muhammad and his companions, the purple arrows. Then we have the 7 readings in green and the transmitters in blue, then the extra 3 readings in red. Note the earliest of the original 7 readers was from 737 and the latest was from 804 AD. This is more than 100 years after Muhammad. None of them would have known him personally. And by the 15th century AD, there were 30 official Arabic Qurans that were all different in some way. Altogether, there are more than 90,000 differences between them. So the bottom line is, the unchanged Quran did change. Here we see the 30 Quran selected by men on a timeline. The Sindh says that Muhammad died in 632. Ibn Mujahid selected his 7 readers in 936 AD. That's a gap of 340 years after Muhammad. Then Al-Shatibi selected his 14 transmitters in 1194 AD. That's 562 years after Muhammad. Then we have Al-Jazari selecting 3 further readers and 6 transmitters in 1429 AD. That's 797 years after the death of Muhammad. Finally, we have the Cairo edition being selected in 1924 AD. That's 1292 years after Muhammad. In summary, 3 men, that is Ibn Mujahid, Al-Shatibi and Al-Jazari, select the versions so that by 1429 there were 30 different Arabic Qurans. In 1924, Cairo selects the Hafs Quran as their standard, and it's done for political reasons. It was made official for Egypt in 1935, and in 1985 the Saudi government makes it their official Quran. But the others are still available today. An analysis has shown nearly 100,000 variants between them. Some of these variants actually change doctrine and practices. So much for the so-called unchanging Quran. This is still a problem today. On June 8, 2020, Dr. Yasser Qadi, a leading expert on the Qira'at, was questioned by YouTube apologist Muhammad Hijab on the issue of variant readings of the Quran. His responses were intriguing. Quote, "The most difficult topics are Ahruf and Qira'at. The most advanced of our scholars are not fully certain how to solve the unanswered questions. This isn't new. This is from the time of the Sahaba, who were the companions of Muhammad." He then goes on to say that, quote, "When you're the beginning student of knowledge, you're like, what is all this going on here? When you go a little more, you simply learn to memorize what your teachers say and regurgitate it out, and you don't fully comprehend. When you do a deep dive is when things get very awkward and difficult," unquote. Notice what he said, that basically Muslims are taught to simply regurgitate what the imams tell them without fully understanding what they are saying. And when they do try to analyze it, things get really messy. Scholar admits that sin has holes. Dr. Qadi went on to say, quote, "The traditional understandings cannot answer some of these pressing questions that are now being poked by their academics. In a Muslim environment, there is always some respect that we have for the Quran. We will press a little bit, but when you go to academia, they don't have that red line. You know the famous story of the emperor with no clothes? They're going to point out that that doesn't make any sense." He states that the level of knowledge is now leaps and bounds ahead of what it used to be. And by and large, our ulema, or scholars, are not aware of what's going on in the Western side of things. And he says that, quote, "They'll bring issues that you know are true because they're in your own books. They're not inventing anything new," unquote. So he is admitting that these problems exist in Islamic sources. We are not making stuff up. At least he's being intellectually honest. And then finally he says, "It's very clear to you that the standard narrative has holes in it. The standard narrative does not answer some very pressing questions." So, a leading scholar admits that the sin has holes. That's right, you heard it from the horse's mouth. This confirms what the evidence of the 5 torpedoes is actually showing. This is an overview of the Hijab Qadi interview. Next, let's look at changes in manuscripts themselves. Because analysis of the earliest manuscripts themselves shows that there are differences in the manuscripts. Some include changes to the rasm or the consonantal skeleton, while some appear to be simply correcting copyist errors. Others appear to be intentional changes. There are also physical changes to the manuscript, such as erasure, overwriting, and covering entire words. What's the end result of these changes? It was to bring the manuscript into line with a text that was at the time regarded as canonical or standard. The majority of the changes bring the manuscript into line with a Hafs text that is now standard for most of the Muslim world. This actually explains the palimpsests, because why would a scribe erase an entire manuscript of the eternal Quran? The only explanation is that they had to correct it so it would line up with a standard text. But the problem was that there were too many corrections required, so the only alternative was to simply erase the entire thing and start again from scratch. Some examples of physical changes to Quranic manuscripts. First, we see an example of a section of text erased with nothing written over the top of it. That's in Surah 24. Then, in Surah 8 verse 3 and Surah 34-35, we see examples of the text being erased with something written over the top of it. The changes bring the manuscript into line with the 1924 Hafs text. Here we have examples of physical covering of manuscripts. In the top example, a section of Surah 2 has been covered over with nothing written over the top of it. In the bottom example, a section of Surah 13 has been covered over with something written over the top of it. The changes bring the manuscript into line with the 1924 Hafs text. The top example from Surah 9 is a very clear example of an erasure with overwriting. The point is not whether or not the meaning has been changed. The point is that the claims of the sin apologists that the Quran has been perfectly preserved down to the very letter are false. And finally, we see an example of a manuscript where the word Allah has been inserted 9 times. Think about that. The most important person in all of Islam, that is Allah, was missing 9 times in an entire manuscript. Again, the end result of these changes is to bring the manuscript into line with the 1924 Hafs text. Torpedo 4 conclusion. The unchanging Quran that was actually changed, and many times at that. In summary, an examination of the textual evidence shows the following. A. The Quran was originally written in a defective script, leading to dozens of different versions being used that caused a theological and political problem. B. By the 10th century, a standard text form was selected by men. This meant that all available manuscripts had to be changed to fit this standard form. And C. This led to multiple changes to the manuscripts. Some of these were physical changes to the manuscripts themselves. In conclusion, the Quran that was supposed to have been revealed complete and preserved unchanged by Allah actually was changed many times over many years by many men. What's the bottom line? Torpedo 4 scores a direct hit.